Jonathan Ward sat alone in the corner of Maple Diner, a roadside cafe with flickering neon lights and the smell of burnt coffee in the air. It had been years since he stepped away from the grand halls that bore his name, hospitals, university libraries, places once built on his fortune. At 54, the word billionaire meant nothing now. He was only a lonely man, sipping cold coffee to quiet the emptiness inside. Eleanor, his wife of 3 decades, had died in a car crash 3 years earlier. Her laughter was gone, leaving behind a silent mansion and a torn heart. Since then, Jonathan had chosen the back roads of the Midwest, drifting to places where no one cared who he was. Maple Diner was one of those stops. Faded wallpaper, chipped mugs, and strangers who felt real. That night, the place was nearly empty. Behind the counter, Grace Miller wiped down the worn wood. Her eyes were shadowed from lack of sleep. At 29, she was a single mother who had once served in the military before coming home to raise her little boy. Bills piled up, the roof leaked, and memories of a mother lost to addiction pressed heavily on her shoulders. Grace carried a tray to Jonathan's table and refilled his cup. Her voice was soft but steady. "Evening, sir. My mom had a ring just like yours." Jonathan froze. His hand tightened around the cup. The silver band on his finger, etched with ivy leaves, was the very ring he had given Eleanor when they were young. How could a stranger possibly recognize it? He looked up slowly and asked, "What did you just say?" Grace touched the chain at her neck, revealing a small ring dangling from it. "It looks exactly like yours. My mom always said it was a gift from someone special." A chill ran down Jonathan's spine. For a moment, time stopped. Faded memories of Eleanor and of Sarah, her closest friend who had vanished years ago, rushed back all at once. That night, Jonathan returned to the small hotel where he was staying. The room was silent, its yellow light casting shadows across chipped walls. He sat on the edge of the bed, slipped the ring off his finger, and studied it under the dim glow. Two names echoed in his mind, Eleanor and Sarah Miller. Sarah had been Eleanor's closest friend in their youth. She stood by her on the wedding day, smiling brightly as she handed Eleanor a small box. Inside was a silver ring, etched with ivy leaves, identical to the one Jonathan now held. Sarah had said then, "So I'll always be with you no matter what." The memory rushed back, leaving Jonathan short of breath. He remembered how, after the wedding, Eleanor tried again and again to pull Sarah out of addiction. She gave her money. She checked her into rehab centers, but Sarah kept slipping. One day she simply disappeared, leaving a silence Eleanor rarely spoke of, except in the moments when she cried alone. And now Grace's ring, Sarah's daughter's ring, had appeared before his eyes. The coincidence felt impossible. Jonathan tightened his grip on the band, wondering, had Eleanor hidden something from him? Had Sarah left behind a secret no one ever revealed? Outside, winter winds lashed against the window, each gust cutting through the cold. Jonathan sat frozen until the first light of dawn, haunted by the thought that everything he believed about the past might not be whole. The next day, he returned to Maple Diner. Grace was busy clearing tables, her small frame steady with quiet endurance. When she noticed Jonathan, she looked surprised, then offered a faint smile. "You came back again?" Jonathan nodded, his voice rough. "I can't stop thinking about yesterday, about that ring." Grace lifted her hand to the chain at her neck, her eyes dropping slightly. "This is the only thing my mom left me. She wasn't perfect, but I still want to hold on." Jonathan swallowed hard, a strong pull rising inside him. He knew that to find the truth, he needed to hear Grace's story. In a rare quiet moment between shifts, Grace sat across from Jonathan. The worn wooden table between them, the fluorescent light above buzzed and flickered, casting a dim glow over the room, making it feel like an impromptu interrogation. Jonathan gave a slight nod, signaling he was ready to listen. Grace hesitated for a few seconds, then began slowly. "My mom, Sarah Miller, she used to sing at a little bar. Her voice could silence a whole room, but off stage, she was a woman carrying deep wounds. I remember nights she'd cradle her guitar, singing me to sleep. But the next morning, she'd disappear for hours. As I grew older, I realized it was the addiction that chained her." Her eyes blurred as the memories spilled out. "She tried to quit, many times because of me. But every promise was followed by another fall. When I was 16, I came home one afternoon and found the apartment empty. On the table was this silver ring and a crumpled note. "I'm sorry, Em. Keep this safe." From that day on, I knew I'd lost her. Jonathan sat silently, absorbing every word. His chest tightened with memories of Eleanor and Sarah in their youth. He could still hear Eleanor's late-night whisper, "I'm afraid I didn't do enough for Sarah." Now the pieces began to align, each one connected by the silver ring. Grace wiped away a tear and forced a small smile. "After that, I enlisted. I thought the discipline would erase the pain. When I came back, I had my daughter Emma. Everything I do now revolves around her. My mom lost her fight, but I can't let history repeat itself." Jonathan studied her closely. In her resilience, he caught glimpses of Eleanor. Gentle, stubborn, but unyielding in spirit. And he knew Grace's story still carried secrets yet to be revealed. In the days that followed, Jonathan became a regular at Maple Diner. He always chose the table by the window, ordered the same black coffee, and quietly watched Grace move between tables with steady endurance. Each evening, he found a way to talk with her a little more, slowly breaking through the guarded look in her eyes. In those conversations, Jonathan spoke about Eleanor, his late wife. He recalled her smile, the years they struggled and built their life together, and the emptiness left after she was gone. Grace listened closely. Sometimes she nodded. Sometimes her eyes glistened, though she stayed silent. There was something in his words that touched the hidden corners of her heart. Yet the more they talked, the more Jonathan sensed an invisible thread binding them. The silver ring was the knot at its center. He began piecing together timelines. Sarah's disappearance, Eleanor's quiet nights of tears, and those vague months when Eleanor would take late-night phone calls she never explained. One evening, as the diner neared closing, Jonathan asked directly, "Grace, did your mother ever mention Eleanor, her old friend?" Grace startled, her eyes widening. "Yes, she often spoke about someone named Eleanor, as if she were a sister. But whenever she brought her up, she grew sad. She said she'd done something that let Eleanor down." The answer struck Jonathan like a blow. He clenched his hands beneath the table, his heart racing. The pieces were locking into place, yet one gap remained wide open. That night, he returned to his hotel with his thoughts in turmoil. After hours of restless pacing, Jonathan made a choice. He hired a private investigator. He handed over everything he knew, Sarah Miller's name, Grace's birth year, and the silver ring etched with ivy leaves. He wasn't sure he was ready for the truth, but he knew he could no longer avoid it. Just a few days later, the detective handed Jonathan a thick file containing yellowed papers and faded copies pulled from local archives. His hand trembled as he opened it. Each line of text cut into his memory like a blade. On Grace's birth certificate, the space for father was left blank, but tucked inside the folder was a small envelope, scrawled across the front, "Eleanor, only for you." Jonathan carefully opened it. Inside was a letter dated 1996, written in Sarah's familiar hand. "My dear, I'm pregnant. It's his child, Jonathan's. But now he's your husband. I can't destroy the life you've built together. Please keep this secret. Don't ever let him know. I was weak. I made mistakes. But I only hope this baby has a chance at life. Forgive me." Jonathan went numb. He read the letter again and again, praying he was mistaken. But the truth was undeniable. Grace was his daughter. Eleanor had known and carried the secret to her grave. Tears blurred his eyes as a storm of rage, grief, and regret overtook him. He felt anger at Eleanor for hiding it, at Sarah for running away, and at himself for being blind to the signs all those years ago. That night, Jonathan sat motionless in his hotel room, the letter clenched tightly in his hand. The words burned in his mind. "It's his child." The sentence tore apart the life he thought he understood. Jonathan knew he could no longer stay silent. He had to face Grace, no matter how much it might shatter the fragile trust they had just begun to build. The next evening, Jonathan walked into Maple Diner with a weary face. The winter wind howled outside, but the cold was nothing compared to the fear twisting inside him. Grace was clearing the last table, her small frame wrapped in an apron stained with coffee. She glanced up, smiled faintly, then quickly noticed something troubled in his eyes. "Are you all right?" Grace asked, her voice edged with worry. Jonathan sat at his usual table and placed the envelope on the worn wood. His fingers tapped lightly, as if gathering courage. At last, his rough voice broke the silence. "Grace, there's something I need to tell you. It's about your mother, about Eleanor, and about me." Grace froze. She set down the cloth and slid into the chair across from him, her eyes searching. "You're scaring me." Jonathan drew a deep breath, pulled the letter from the envelope, and set it on the table. The diner's light fell across the fragile paper, its hurried handwriting still clear. He pushed it toward her. "This is a letter your mother wrote to Eleanor years ago." Grace picked it up and read line by line. Her lips trembled, her eyes darkened. When she reached the words, "It's his child, Jonathan," her hand went limp, and the paper slipped onto the table. "No, this can't be true." Her voice cracked. Jonathan's eyes burned. "Grace, I didn't know. I swear to you, Eleanor and Sarah never told me. But now I know for certain, I am your father." The diner froze around them. The clock ticked. The wind hissed through the doorframe. Grace clutched her head, tears spilling. She cried out, "So all my life I grew up without a father? Because of their secrets?" Jonathan started to reach for her, then stopped. He knew this moment wasn't for explanations. It was for her to break and release what had been hidden too long. Grace pushed back her chair, its legs scraping the floor. She stared at him, fury and despair colliding in her face. "I need time. I can't. I can't hear anymore." She turned and hurried out the back door, her petite figure swallowed by the night. Jonathan remained seated, his hands shaking, his heart sinking into an abyss. He knew the curtain of secrecy had been torn wide open, but whether the road ahead could ever be mended, he could not yet tell. In the days that followed, Maple Diner glowed as always, but between Grace and Jonathan lay a heavy silence. She didn't quit her job. She didn't run. Yet she avoided the table by the window, his table. When they had to cross paths, she offered only a polite smile, her eyes sliding away, as if an invisible wall stood between them. Jonathan still came every evening. He ordered the same black coffee and sat quietly for hours. He didn't press her. He didn't justify himself. He knew he had no right to demand forgiveness. All he could do was be present, show her he wouldn't vanish like her mother, nor hide the truth the way Eleanor once did. One night, as snow drifted thick against the diner's window, Jonathan watched Grace clean the tables. He saw how thin her shoulders had grown, how sorrow lingered at the edges of her eyes. His chest tightened. "To be a father, yet let my child endure years this harsh. I owe her more than I can repay." But Grace was restless too. Each time her necklace swung, the silver ring reminded her of the letter. Sarah's confession could never be erased. The anger still burned, yet beneath it something faint stirred. A longing for a place to lean, for a family she'd believed forever lost. A week passed, then two. One snowy night, as the first flakes of winter blurred the diner's glass, Grace slowly approached Jonathan's table. In her hand was the chain with the ring. She set it gently on the table, her voice breaking. "I've been thinking about my mom, about Eleanor, about you. I'm so angry, but I can't keep living in that anger. I don't know if I can forgive yet, but I want to try. At least try to understand you." Jonathan looked up. In his eyes flickered a fragile light of hope, something he hadn't dared believe in for years. From the moment Grace set the ring on the table, the air inside Maple Diner shifted. Jonathan managed a trembling smile. He didn't dare touch the ring right away, afraid even the slightest movement might shatter this fragile chance. "Thank you, my child," he whispered, then hesitated. The word child slipped out naturally, heavy with emotion. Grace didn't recoil. She stayed silent, her eyes wet, as if weighing the sound of that word for the first time. In the days that followed, they began to talk more. At first, just small questions. "Was your shift hard today?" Or, "What's Emma's favorite food?" Then the conversations stretched longer, digging deeper, into Grace's childhood, into Eleanor's memory, into the empty spaces in both their lives that now somehow they might fill for each other. One weekend afternoon, Jonathan met Emma for the first time. The 3-year-old ran across the diner in a wool dress, curls bouncing, eyes bright. When she looked up and smiled, Jonathan saw a trace of Eleanor in that smile and a glimmer of Sarah in her eyes. Kneeling, he held out a small teddy bear. Emma clutched it tight, giggling, then paused and whispered, "Grandpa?" The single word pierced Jonathan's heart, leaving him breathless. Grace stood nearby, lips pressed together, but her gaze softened. Bit by bit, the walls between them began to crack. Jonathan paid to repair the leaking roof, but refused to call it help. He said instead, "This is a father's responsibility." Grace accepted, no longer resisting so fiercely. She knew forgiveness was still a long way off. Yet she also knew she couldn't let the chance to build something new, for Emma, slip away. Time passed. The harsh winter slowly gave way to the warmth of spring. Jonathan was no longer the stranger sitting silently in the corner of Maple Diner. Now he was the silver-haired man who sometimes shared a gentle smile with little Emma, the man Grace allowed to step, carefully but surely, into her and her daughter's life. One Sunday morning, Jonathan took Grace and Emma to an empty lot on the edge of town. Before them stood a new wooden sign, Sarah Miller Community Center. Jonathan's voice was steady, low but resolute, as he explained. "I want this place to be a home for those fighting addiction, like your mother once did, so they won't have to fight alone." Grace stood still, clutching the necklace with the silver ring. Tears welled, but this time they weren't from pain. They came from a fragile hope, slowly being reborn. In the evenings that followed, Jonathan often visited Grace's home. He read books with Emma, listening to her laughter fill the small but warm apartment. Grace enrolled in night classes, pursuing her long-delayed dream of becoming a nurse. Jonathan stayed close, not as a billionaire with power, but simply as a father cheering on his daughter with quiet patience. A year later, in Grace's tiny kitchen, 3 generations sat around the same table. Emma proudly held up a drawing, a red-roofed house, a tall tree in the yard, and 3 figures standing side by side. "This is our family," she said. Jonathan gazed at the picture, his heart swelling with a peace he hadn't felt in years. All the losses, all the painful secrets, no longer stood as wounds. They had become the very pieces that bound them together. That afternoon, Maple Diner still chimed at the door, the scent of apple pie drifting through the room. But unlike the first day Jonathan walked in, the air now carried warmth. He no longer sat alone with a cup of cold coffee. Across from him was Grace, and beside her, little Emma coloring a fresh picture. The golden light of late day streamed through the window, glinting off 2 silver rings on the table, one on Jonathan's hand, the other hanging from the chain at Grace's chest. They were no longer relics of secrets or sorrow. They had become symbols of healing, of a family found again. Grace lifted her gaze, her eyes no longer distant. "I never thought I'd have a father sitting here with me and Emma. But now, I don't feel alone anymore." Jonathan smiled, his eyes shining. "Neither do I. For so long, I thought I'd lost everything. But it turns out, the most precious things are sitting right in front of me." Emma piped up suddenly, her voice sweet and earnest. "Can we go to the park after we eat, Grandpa?" The innocent question made them both laugh, their laughter filling the small diner. In that moment, Jonathan knew Eleanor must be smiling too, somewhere beyond his reach. She had left him not only memories, but the chance to love again. Quietly, he whispered in his heart, "I've found our family again, Elle. Whole and at peace, just as you wished." As the jukebox played its gentle tune, I couldn't help but reflect on what this story means to me. Growing up, I saw how secrets can tear families apart, and how unspoken truths can build walls that seem impossible to overcome. But this story of Jonathan, Grace, and Emma reminds us that it's never too late to tear those walls down. Forgiveness isn't easy. It's a choice, a daily commitment to rebuild what was broken. Their journey shows that even after years of pain, a single moment of courage can open the door to a new beginning. To anyone watching, I hope you find the strength to reach out, to forgive, to start again. Because family, in all its imperfect beauty, is worth fighting for. Outside, the gentle tune of the old jukebox floated like a farewell to winter. Inside, 3 souls sat together, not bound by wealth or fame, but by the unseen threads of blood, of kinship, and of forgiveness. This story closes not with loss, but with peace, the peace of a family finally reunited after years of wandering apart.